Ooh, that's bright. Well, good afternoon. My name is Karen Borglum, and I want to thank you for coming today to learn a little bit more about the amendments that are going to be on your ballot in November. I am the co-chair for the Speakers Bureau for the League of Women Voters, Seminole County. And I'd like to thank Beverly Sanchez and James Miller for inviting me to come here today to share a little bit about what your yes vote or no vote means this November. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First, let me just tell you a very little bit about the League of Women Voters. We are nonpartisan. We were established in 1920 when women got the right to vote, and since 1972 we've allowed men into the League of Women Voters. And our role is primarily to do research, to educate, and to advocate, not for people, but on positions. So this is everything that's going to be on your ballot this year. There were 13 amendments at first on the ballot, but there's been a lot of movement with the ballot, with the amendments, some challenges, and we'll talk about them. So for now, there are 12 amendments on your ballot. So how does an amendment get on the ballot? Well, there's one of three ways in which that happens. The first is through our legislators. There are 3 amendments on the ballot that are from our legislators. The second way is through citizens' initiatives. And for a citizens' initiative to get on the ballot, what they have to have are signatures from 8% of registered voters who voted in the last presidential election. So that doesn't mean that you have had to vote in the last presidential election. It means if you're a registered voter, they need 8% of people of the total number of voters. Like there were like 9 million voters last year in the state of Florida, a little over. And so we needed at least 720 signatures for any citizens initiative. And there'll be, did I say 720,000? 720,000, sorry. There are 2 initiatives that are citizens initiatives on the ballot. And then the rest come from the Constitution Review Committee, and that is a 37-member committee. And the Attorney General is on that committee. The governor appoints 15 people. The House appoints 9. The state Senate appoints 9, and then the state Supreme Court appoints 3. Okay? And the difference between the CRC and the other 2 ways that amendments get onto the ballot is that the CRC can actually bundle the initiatives. So what that means is that there could be multiple components to an amendment with a CRC initiative, and they meet every 20 years. So, all the pushback that you might have been reading about or hearing about has come mostly from those amendments 6 through 13, because that's where the CRC, that's what they put in. So the other piece is that for an amendment to pass, there has to be a 60% approval from voters. So it's not a simple majority. Any questions about that? All right, so let's just jump right in. So the first amendment is a state legislator amendment, and this is about increased homestead tax assessments. So presently, what that means is if you have a home valued at $50,000 or more, your homestead exemption is $50,000. What the amendment is trying to do is it's trying to add another $25,000 for homestead exemption. So that would mean that your exemption would be $75,000 for homes valued at $125,000 or more. And that would start January 2019. So one of the issues that has come up is that there could be a loss of revenue generated from the increase. Tampa Times estimates like $645 million of revenue loss if the increase goes through. But a no vote retains things exactly the way they are, and a yes vote says that you would approve the increase. Here are the organizations, I'm not going to read them to you, who support and oppose this piece of legislation or this amendment. Questions? Sir? For the amendment? Sure. So it would, Amendment 1 increases, if there was a yes vote, it would increase the homestead exemption from $50,000 to $75,000, but at homes valued at $125,000 or more. Right now, it's a $50,000 exemption for homes valued at $50,000 or more. Okay? So Amendment 2 is about limitations on property tax assessments. So about 10 years ago, we had put into place in the state a cap of 10% on all non-homestead assessments. So that means rental properties, second homes, commercial properties had a cap on non-homestead assessments at 10% of the property value. And so this would, if voted yes, would keep the current 10% cap, right? Because the 10% cap is set to expire January 2019. It was put in place 10 years ago. And if you vote no, it means that there would be tax limits, it would end tax limits, I'm sorry, on the homestead assessments. Does that kind of make sense? So a yes vote keeps the 10%, and no vote says it could fluctuate. And here are institutions that both support and oppose this particular amendment. Okay. So Amendment 3 is a citizens' initiative. What Amendment 3 is about casino gambling in Florida. And who gets control of that? So presently, legislators get to decide whether or not casinos are allowed to emerge in Florida. What this citizens initiative did, and I believe that there was over 1 million signatures, is it would say that the voters could put together a citizens initiative to approve or authorize a casino in their district or in their area, not the legislators. Now, the important thing to note about this is it's strictly for casinos, not for poker rooms, bingo, fantasy sports. The legislators would still have control over those gambling options. But casino gambling, if this passes, would be controlled by citizens. And a no vote would say that the legislators would continue to make those decisions. Okay, and our supporters and our opposers. Okay. So Amendment 4 is also a citizens initiative. This is voter restoration rights. I'm sure you've heard a lot about this one as well. So nationally, there are 6 million disenfranchised voters. Florida has 1.6 million of those. So right now, what happens is if you're an ex-felon and you've served your time and you've completed your probation, you have to wait 5 years in order to petition the state to restore your voter rights. And there's a 4-person commission that makes those decisions. That would be the governor, the attorney general, the comptroller, and I'm sorry, I forget the 4th person. But they would make those decisions. In 2011, the state of Florida enacted some stricter kind of standards for making those decisions. And since 2011, 3,000 people have had their voter rights restored. 30,000 are still waiting for their ability to petition. So a yes vote would say that someone who's an ex-felon and who has completed their time and completed their probation, providing they're not convicted of murder or a felony rape assault, they would get their rights back automatically. And a no vote would say that we would keep the system the way it currently is, which is a 5-year wait. Okay, those people who support, as you can see, and the people who oppose. Questions about Amendment 4? All right. So Amendment 5 is from our legislators, and this is about supermajority vote being required to raise fees or taxes. So right now it's a simple majority, right? If this amendment goes through, what that would mean is that 2/3 of the Senate and the House would have to vote to approve any tax fee increase. And a no vote would keep it at a simple majority vote. Now this would mean things like fishing licenses, sales tax, firearm licenses, things like that would have to require a 2/3 majority for approval for any kind of fee increase. What it does not account for is things like hurricanes or floods and things like that. So they're not we're not sure how that would play out, right? Because you would not have, they're not part of this discussion. So that would be a concern. Okay. And a no vote would keep it at a simple majority. Here are the folks who support and the folks that oppose. All right, does that one make sense to you guys? I feel like you guys are really quiet. I know it's lunchtime. Beverly? Yeah, of course, of course. So right now it's a simple majority if anytime we want to raise sales tax or any kind of fee in Florida from our legislators and our senates. But this, if you vote yes, what would have to happen is that 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate would have to approve the tax fee increase. And so that is anything that requires a fee, but there's no provision in this amendment for what happens if there's a hurricane or there's an emergency.
So to make better sense of it, basically you vote yes would say that it's kind of like making it harder to raise the taxes in the voting.
Yes.
If you just say no, then I'll just take as a simple majority vote rather than something where it's like, oh no, you have to be super solid about this in order to raise the taxes.
That is correct. But the concern is, well, what happens when there's a natural disaster, right, like a hurricane or flood in the state? Then we still need a 2/3 vote, and there's no provision in there for, that's an emergency situation. So there's no provision for emergency situations is the concern.
Emergency situations aside, why would it be smart to trust the legislature to control what we pay in taxes as opposed to making it more difficult for them to make that decision for us?
Well, and I think that that's the question that you have to ask yourself is like, does it make more sense to have the legislators have more restrictions to raise taxes or less restrictions to raise taxes? And that's only something you can decide. So I'm not here to advocate one way or the other for your vote.
Why is it opposed by all those groups?
That's the big one. The big one is really about natural disasters, and we live in Florida, and we have hurricane season, and then what happens for people who might actually need some emergency help. Okay. Okay, so 6 through 11 have had a lot, well, actually 6 through 13 have had a lot of conversation, and some have been pulled off and put back on and has had some opposition, and so I'm going to try and explain to you what has happened. But from here on out, everything else that you see is from the Constitutional Review Committee. So this is my advice to you when you're going through this, because there'll be multiple parts to these amendments, is to find the piece of the amendment that you find most egregious, and then decide, if I vote yes, can I live with that egregious thing? If I vote no, can I live with that egregious thing, right? So think about it in those terms, because a yes vote or a no vote means you accept or reject the whole package. You can't separate it out, okay? All right, so 6, I know you've seen commercials on this one. This is about Marsy's Law. This is about the rights of crime victims and judges. So in this one, there's literally 4 components to this amendment. The first one is about expanding rights of victims in the Constitution. Victims have rights in our Constitution presently. They have rights such as there's compensation funds depending upon what you're a victim of. They have rights if there was to have their assailant have an HIV test, should there have been body fluids exchanged, things like that is what they presently have. This would expand victims' rights, and it was based on a situation that happened, a horrible situation that happened in California, where a woman was murdered by her ex-boyfriend because he was released from jail and was not notified. She was not notified that he was released. So California enacted this law, and that made its way to our amendments. Excuse me. It will also limit the accused's ability to appeal, the time limit for which an accused can appeal his or her case. So it would say that if it's approved, the accused would have 2 years to appeal on a non-capital offense and only 5 years to appeal on a capital offense. It would also eliminate existing language in our Constitution that says that victims' rights do not interfere with the rights of the accused. That language would come out. It also raises the judges' retirement ages from 70 to 75, although it does not, it would not impact people who are up for retirement this year. And it would prohibit courts and judges from deferring to state agencies for how they interpret law. So we're in Seminole State College, and we get laws handed to us annually, and the Department of Education makes decisions about what that means. So a yes vote on Amendment 6 would then say that the courts and judges would have to interpret whether or not the state agencies made correct interpretations of that law. It would also then enshrine more victims' rights into the Constitution. It would eliminate language in the Constitution that provides for that a victim's rights don't supersede the rights of the accused. And it would then also raise the judge's retirement age from 70 to 75. So a no vote would just allow the same victims' rights that we have. It would keep the judges at a retirement age of 70. It would say that the state agencies can interpret laws as they have, and it would make sure that the piece about the accused rights in the Constitution is still in place. Sir?
So when you say like their rights don't interfere with that of the accused, if that were to go through, what exactly would happen?
So the additional victims' rights would be about like pre-trial screenings, pre-trial hearings, those kinds of things that right now that they don't automatically have. I mean, they could find out the information, but the responsibility is really on that person. And so that would be the expanded victims' rights. And then, which is, I think, where the concern about where the accused rights are to their own privacy. Ma'am?
I guess what I'm trying to make sure that I have at least understood is that pretty much what's happening is that the victims' rights are expanded upon, but in the case that, say if the judge elected, then you're basically stuck with that judge for an extra 5 years on top of whatever it is, the age that they get elected at.
Well, yes. I mean, if they're voted in, they can stay until they're 75. Yes.
In which case, it's like you get more victims' rights, but then you also have to just be extra careful about who you put in the judge position.
Yeah. Well, the judges get voted on as well. So but yes, and I think it's harder to find out. This is just personal now, but I think it's harder to find out a lot about the judges that we put into office, and because it takes a lot of investigation and research to decide. And so, yes, I think that could happen. Sir, did you have a question as well?
Yeah. What is it eliminating about the rights of the accused exactly?
So it would have more to do with sort of their privacy about their pretrial hearings and screenings, and because that information would be more public to the victim. It'd be readily available. So just to put this into context, there are 67 county judges, 67 Florida sheriffs, in the state, and so 24 support, and then Florida Smart Justice supports, and then of course ACLU and the league are opposed. Okay. So number 7 has multiple parts to it too. This is all about first responder and death benefits for survivors, and it also deals with public colleges and universities. So this impacts you as well. So what it does right now is it would create and mandate that first responders would have, their spouses would have death benefits and their children would have death benefits. The state would provide for that. And that they also expand the definition of first responders to include paramedics and EMTs right now, with this amendment, I'm sorry. And the military members presently have federal funding for death benefits for their spouses, their survivors, and their children. This would also give military an additional state benefit as well. Now, it also would require that there would be a supermajority, 2/3, for the Board of Trustees at universities and the Board of Governors that oversees all of the universities. They would have to have a 2/3 approval for any increase in fees, not tuition, just your fees. So like your distance learning fee, your student activity fee, that would require 2/3 majority vote. And then it would also establish state colleges, such like yourselves, into the Constitution, because presently we do not exist in the Constitution. Really? The universities do, but we don't. So the yes vote then, of course, would say that there would be 2/3 majority for any university fee increase by Board of Governors and the Board of Trustees. It would also add state colleges into the framework of the Constitution, and it would require the state to pay death benefits to survivors of military first responders. Yes, ma'am.
What's the supermajority?
2/3. So there's some thought that there would be sort of a protection, as it were, to say that we exist and that we have a framework and a structure in the Constitution, because right now, you know, the Florida Department of Education kind of oversees us, but then if we're in the Constitution, that we have some rights. And maybe I could defer to James a little bit from AFC. There is some thought that there'd be like sort of like another board that would oversee all of the state colleges instead of having boards of trustees for every college, and so this would be a way perhaps to ensure that that would not happen.
Yeah, so currently all the Florida colleges, 28 of them, have their district boards of trustees who kind of oversee the operations of the college. One of the recent proposals for reconfiguring the system was to create a kind of central in Tallahassee board that would oversee all of the 28 colleges. So that didn't pass last year in the Florida legislature, but that was one of the proposals to reconfigure the system.
Yes, ma'am.
So from my time being on student government, you do have the Florida College System student government
That's correct. Right now, we are not.
The government's going to share this.
And to clarify for the military and first responders families, that would be additional benefits provided by the state in addition to federal benefits?
For the military. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
How would it impact the colleges when they're written into the Constitution? I think that's the framework stuff.
I think it just would be sort of the way to kind of say that they exist and have some protected rights as far as like who governs them. So it would depend on how it gets written into the Constitution. I don't think that that part has really been worked out. Maybe AFC knows a little bit better than I do about that piece.
My understanding is that in this particular case, a vote of yes keeps the same system.
Mm-hmm.
A vote of no also keeps the same system. The difference is now that system is written in the Constitution as opposed to in the governance documents of the state.
Like our statutes. So we have statutes that say that we exist, but the Constitution doesn't acknowledge that that there's a state college system, and then I think that what the Constitution would have to say, and correct me if I'm wrong here, James, but like how the governing body works at the state college levels, like with the Board of Trustees and so forth. Okay. Okay. Here are the folks who support and the folks that are opposed to it. So 8 was removed from the ballot. The League of Women Voters had made a big push about this because this was about who gets to determine public schools, when public schools can start a new public school, right? So right now, each district gets to determine if there's a new public school that opens up, and this is inclusive of charter schools. And what 8 would have done, in part, there were multiple pieces to this amendment, but the piece that was really the big push to get it off the ballot was about charter schools and giving the legislators the ability to create charter schools and taking that ability from local districts away. And so this, you will not see this one on your ballot. So here's kind of a wacky one. These are bundled together. Number 9 is about offshore drilling and about vaping, because those two things go together really well. Right? You see it, right? You see the connection. So what a vote yes means on 9 is that Florida would ban offshore drilling for oil and gas on Florida waters, not federal waters. And I was told that federal waters are like 13 miles offshore on Florida's coast and 3 miles on Florida's west coast and 3 miles on Florida's east coast. So that's when it becomes federal waters. But this is strictly for Florida waters, no offshore drilling for gas or oil. And it would also then say to our legislators that, you know, we have concerns about offshore drilling. And then it would also prohibit vaping in public places, much like we have with cigarettes. Yeah. This is the response we get on this one all the time.
Personally, when it comes to the drilling, I don't think anyone should be drilling in the ocean at all. But how exactly is that related to vaping?
It's not. It's not.
I'm pro vaping. I think it's a better idea than smoking cigarettes. So why can't I vote for one or the other? Why do I have to say, oh yeah, I don't want you polluting our oceans, but that means I also can't vape in public? Like,
Well, it wouldn't be public. I mean, public. It'd be like the same restrictions you have right now for vaping. I mean, in all honesty, it would be the same restrictions that you would have for vaping as you would for cigarette smoking, right? You're not allowed to smoke cigarettes in restaurants. It would be those kinds of restrictions, not in public places, okay?
But the bundling of these very, very different things is one of the big complaints about the amendments that came from the constitutional provision.
Somebody was like thinking about pollution, and the first thing that came to mind was, you know what, vaping.
Yeah.
So they put these out there where they're like, oh, I'm going to batch this with this, and just to, you know, have, you know.
So 7 and 9 and 11 have been appealed, but they're still they're going to be on the ballot.
Okay. Currently, how many
You know, that's a great question, and I'm so sorry. I don't have the answer. I can find the answer out for you and send it to James, but I don't have it off the top of my head, and I don't want to guess. Okay. So a no would keep the drilling ban out of the Constitution. It would signal to our legislators that we're not concerned about offshore drilling, and it would then keep vaping out of the Constitution. Here are the people who support it and the people who are opposed to it.
Well, of course you're gonna have wishy-washy things, like,
None of this should be surprising to you, right, of who supports and who opposes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Number 10. This is state and local structure of government. This one there was concern. It was pulled off for a little bit because Miami-Dade and Broward and Volusia counties had some concerns with this. But it is back on the ballot. So right now, our legislators on odd number years start their session in March. But in even numbered years, there's no provision in the Constitution for when the legislators begin to meet. So this would put into our Constitution that our legislators in even numbered years would start session in January. Then it would also create an office of counterterrorism. Right now, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is the overseer of counterterrorism efforts. It would also mandate the existence of Department of Veterans Affairs. So right now, there's nothing that keeps us from having a Department of Veterans Affairs, but then this would say that we will have a Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, the part that bothered Miami-Dade, Broward, and Volusia counties was the last one. So what this says is that Florida must keep and never abolish offices like sheriff, property appraiser, supervisor of election, clerk of the courts, and they have to be voted on. So right now we have, I think it's 20 charter areas, charter counties. And what that means is if you're a charter county, you kind of have like your little own constitution within your charter that allows you to create laws for your county. And in Miami-Dade specifically, they appoint the sheriff. They don't elect the sheriff. And so they had some real concerns about that because it would fundamentally change the way that they have always done business. Because this says that you have to vote on them and you have to keep them. No more appointing. So I think the yes vote then is about even years when the legislative session meets. It's about keeping those offices of sheriff, clerk of the court, property appraiser, supervisor of elections, and making them be voted on instead of appointed. It would create a Department of Counterterrorism, and it would mandate a Department of Veterans Affairs. And a no vote would sort of keep things the way they are. Questions on this one? They appoint, yes. Yes. So when they were established, so when some of these counties were established, they established themselves as a charter county. And so that meant that they got to create some of their own laws and practices. And I think that the pushback was really, if you're going to start pushing back on some of the things that are within our county charter, at what point does that stop? Like at what point, so at what point do we start making decisions for a county from a statewide perspective? And I really think that that's the big pushback. Okay. So supporters and opposition. I think it was safe to say that Miami-Dade, Broward, and Volusia, that was in the paper, so. Okay. Moving along, Amendment 11 also has multiple pieces. This is really about obsolete language in our Constitution presently and the removal of that. So the first part of this amendment, we have a Alien Land Law Act, which was established in 1926 in our Constitution. And it says, essentially when it was established, was to keep Chinese people from owning, buying, or selling property. That law is not enforceable, but it is in our Constitution still. The second piece of this legislation is about criminals who commit crimes, that was redundant, and that they could be tried under laws as they've changed. So right now, if you've been put away for a crime, what happens is that you finish out your sentence, even if that law has changed. And the one that came up in one of the other sessions that I had done, someone asked about the medical marijuana law, right? So if you were using marijuana and you went to jail for that, then because the law has changed, and maybe you could have it for medicinal purposes, then you would still have to finish out your sentence rather than the fact that the law has changed. And then the other piece is about the high-speed rail. So in 2000, the Florida voters, maybe not you all because you look kind of young and maybe you didn't vote yes. We voted yes for high-speed rail. And then in 2004, we said, no, we changed our mind, we don't really want that. But the language is still in the Constitution that we have a high-speed rail. So this kind of cleans up a lot of language in our Constitution.
What's high-speed rail?
That was the rail that was going to take us from one part of the state to the other part of the state at like high speeds. And at some point, we really thought that was a great idea. And then at another point in time, we did not think that that was a good idea.
We don't have to vote on all of these, do we, during the election?
Well, I mean, no, you don't have to vote on all of them.
There's a lot of different that I don't think I can choose one or the other, yes or no. Some of the opposing things, like when it says non-citizens, does that mean like non-citizens of the United States can't buy property currently?
Yeah, but it's not enforceable. So the law is not enforceable right now.
So it doesn't matter if they're the law.
Correct.
So,
Or the other way is like, maybe we're cleaning up language. I don't, that's what the idea is, I think, behind the CRC's putting this in here is to kind of clean up some of the language that doesn't hold true anymore to us in our Constitution.
So when it's like the prosecuting criminals one,
Mm-hmm.
can you like recap exactly what would happen if we voted yes?
Okay, so if you vote yes, let me pull this slide up. So right now, we have a requirement in our Constitution that says that a criminal suspect have to, they complete their time for the law when it was committed, not if the law has changed, right? So if the law changes, that could free up someone's sentencing requirements. It could make their sentences change because the law has changed. So right now, we say that they have to finish out their sentence even if the law has changed. Okay? And then a no vote just sort of keeps things just the way they are. The language stays in the Constitution exactly the way it is written. Okay. Okay, Amendment 12. Let me tell you how my understanding of how things work, because this is about lobbying and abuses of public office. This should get your attention. So right now, what happens is our state representatives can get paid to lobby federal and local agencies. They can't get paid to lobby their state agencies. They would have to wait presently 2 years after they leave office in order to have a lobbying gig for the state, right, where they would get paid. This amendment says, no, you're not going to wait 2 years, you're going to wait 6 years. You're not going to be able to do any lobbying work for 6 years and get paid for state, federal, or local. And that would be inclusive of the governor, and it would be inclusive of cabinet members as well. Yes, ma'am.
Would they be able to do it for free?
I would imagine that they could probably do it for free, yes, but they could not get paid. But the other part of this law is that you could not, it's supposed to prevent undue benefit for our elected officials, so that you and your family could not benefit in an undue way or an excessive way. But there's no parameters for what that looks like yet, so an ethics committee would have to be formed in order to say this is what we mean by excessive. Okay. So a no vote keeps the 2-year ban in place. A yes vote increases the ban on lobbying, paid lobbying, for 6 years. And here are the folks who support it and the folks who are opposed to it. Okay, 13. 13 has been very chaotic and kind of odd, and I actually did some extra research on this one because it felt like it was contradicting itself a whole lot. So you felt that way too? Yeah, it feels weird. So it says it ends dog racing, but that's not actually accurate. But this is what is written on the amendment, right? So this is not our interpretation. This is the way it would read. So right now in the state, we're a pari-mutuel state for gambling, which means that people place bets against each other in the state, and that our dog tracks have the ability to have things like slot machines and card rooms and things like that if they agree to have a certain number of races a year, dog races a year. So what this amendment is trying to do is it's trying to say that there won't be any wagering on dog races in the state of Florida. And that would start December 31st, 2020, right? Or it would actually start January 1st, 2021. Now, the interesting thing that I noted in my extra research is, so we couldn't gamble or make wages on dogs racing on our tracks, but if there are 18 tracks in the nation, Florida has 12. So let's say another state, like, I don't know, Kentucky, I'm just gonna throw a state out there, had a dog racing. It would not prohibit you from gambling on the Kentucky race. It would just keep you from gambling on Florida races. So it's a little confusing, I think. And the idea is that it would result in a loss of about $1 million in taxes. The thing that I had read additionally was that right now there's dog track racing has lost like $34 million over the last few years, but the owners make up for that through the card rooms and the slots to the tune of like $39 million. So, was that perfectly confusing for you?
Seems like it's full of loopholes.
To me, and that's why it had originally come off for a while, or there was like some pushback on this one, because it isn't really clear. It feels very misleading in the way that it has been worded. So, here's who supports it and who opposes it. So what questions do you have? What might I be able to help you with today? You are all registered voters? Yes?
I missed Amendment 2.
Oh, Amendment 2, that is about capping the limit on non-homestead properties. Right now there's I'll flip it back so that you can see it. Sorry, I don't mean to make you all crazy with the clicker. So right now we have a 10% cap on all non-residential assessments. So that's like if you have a second property, a vacation home, commercial property, you have a cap on the assessment that you can pay, which is 10% of your property value. This would end that cap. If you vote no, it ends the limit. And if you vote yes, the cap of 10% stays on. It's set to expire in January of 2019. And that's why it's on the amendment, or that's why it's on the ballot. Did that help you?
No.
Okay. So right now, you pay an assessment based on the value of your properties, right? And for second properties, like if you had a rental home or a vacation home or a commercial property, you would be capped at 10%. It didn't matter what the value of your home was. It would just cap the assessment at 10%. And so if you vote yes, it would keep the 10%. But if you vote no, that property value could be assessed at 15%, 20%, 25%. It would just depend. So it's just a matter of what you think would be more appropriate for non-residential properties. Does that help you a little bit more?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I hope that this helped you understand what's on your ballot and the amendments a little bit more. Remember that 6 through 13 are bundled, and so, well, 6 through 12 are bundled, and they're a little confusing. So again, just think about what is the most egregious part to you, yes or no, and that would be the way you would vote, or you just don't vote on those ones at all. Okay, so voting is November 6th. We hope to see you all out there. Thank you. Thank you so much.